Hey everyone, I'm Steve from GamersNexus.net, and I'm joined by Patrick Stone.
Also from GamersNexus.net.
And we're here at CES 2016. This is the end of day one. As you can tell, we are already loopy from sleep deprivation. All of our CES 2016 coverage is brought to you by iWiPower's Revolt 2 small form factor gaming PC. Today we are talking about the HTC Vive, the final version, which as of today has been officially announced. And the other product we're talking about is the Oculus Rift, which finally, after delays and other issues, resolutions of programming development problems, it is coming to the market soon. Pre-orders are open on Wednesday, so that is in a couple days here, or tomorrow, as of when this video goes up. We're focusing on experiences for the HTC Vive versus the Oculus Rift headset for now. So I played with the HTC Vive at NVIDIA's suite today. You played with the newest Oculus Rift headset. Right. And I was in the Everest game or simulation, whatever you want to call it, which is built in the Unreal Engine 4. And what did you play on the Rift?
So I was doing Bullet Train on the Rift, and another one that I toyed with for a few minutes, not very long, Surgeon Simulator, I think is what it was called. But two very different games for sure.
Right. So previously, I've had experience with one of the very early models of the HTC Vive at GDC 2015, I think, and you had pretty deep experience at
PAX Prime,
where we got some development and hardware
just a few months ago,
knowledge, So with the Vive, I'll say this from an experience standpoint, Everest, the demo was definitely impressive. It uses, I think they said 30,000 real-world photos of the area, stitches them together, and creates an environment. So all the textures, all that stuff is derived from reality. The height mapping, all that, is also representative of reality with the height of different chasms. There's an 18,000-foot drop at one point. You can look straight down. And I don't have any vertigo problems. Certainly didn't have them in the game. But the guy running the demo said that some of the other folks who had tried it actually opted out at that point because they started feeling weird or uncomfortable or sick.
And that's kind of the thing with VR,
right?
Is that like the developers have to develop for nausea. That's
right.
That was talked about frequently.
And in that case, though, the nausea was because of an experience in the game virtually. So it's actually doing its job of putting you in this situation where it's real enough to trigger that same vertigo response.
Yeah.
And the other type of nausea is stuff with time warp, where you see frame time issues that you'll pick up in normal games playing. You can just look right past them. It's just tearing. But in virtual reality, we were talking to NVIDIA about this. What was the big thing with the multi-res shading?
Yeah, so where they were just, I guess, in order to make the experience feel right, they had to keep a very high a megapixel per second rate.
Right.
And
490 or 450 or something.
Yeah, exactly. Versus like, what was it, 60 for regular games?
Something like that, yeah. 30 FPS at 1080 was like 60 megabits per second.
Yeah, megapixels per second. And so the only way they were able to get the cards to crunch through that much data was just to do this multi-res thing where they were focusing on the middle of the picture. Not necessarily just the middle, but not the outside. And since the technology allows you to kind of warp the outside to fit the lenses in the VR headsets, they were able to focus more on the center, and in doing that, the megapixel per second that was necessary was able to be achieved.
Right, so the rendering towards the outside where it starts exiting your peripheral vision, the render quality is reduced, but there's not really a visual perceptible decrease in that quality. Whereas with a flat panel, you would actually see a decrease in quality because that's how a flat panel works. So that was an interesting solution to a problem of how do we push more megapixels through this pipeline fast enough.
Yeah,
and it's got to be at 90 FPS too.
Yeah,
VR.
I didn't know it was that high. I heard it was higher, but I didn't know it was that high, and that's a pretty big number.
Yeah, and latency also has to be low.
Less than 20, right?
Yeah, something 20 milliseconds. So that's all stuff that needs to be tested, of course, going forward. But what were your experiences with the Oculus Rift demo today?
So having been able to use the Oculus Rift in earlier development phases and use the HTC Vive in earlier development phases, the Oculus Rift is definitely closer to a finished product now. it when I was talking to the people that were doing the demo for me, I made a statement and I said, I could easily see myself wearing this headset for an hour and not feeling any kind of real fatigue.
Right.
The padding, the foam padding, isn't super thick, but it's comfortable. And then playing the games, it really is a pretty good virtual reality experience. The Bullet Train demo, for instance, it's a shooter, and I didn't take any damage to my player character,
Right.
but I was dishing out, and it was really cool. I'm not very good with FPS games in general, like using the two joysticks. I've never been great at. I'll play, but I've never been great at it,
Right.
and I've always said, hey man, in real life I can shoot a gun pretty well, and so I was forever. I've thought, what if in a video game I could act like I did in real life, and
Right.
here's my opportunity. And sure enough, it was a lot easier to shoot when I had two triggers in my hands, or in the case of a shotgun, holding and shooting, or some kind of automatic rifle, or semi-automatic rifle, and even just throwing grenades. Like everything was a little bit closer to the real thing,
Except for the pins.
yeah. Yeah, so one of the things in the Bullet Train demo, that when you pick up the grenades, I'm used to thinking, pick up a grenade, pull pin out, launch.
Yeah.
Except
you've thrown a lot of grenades in your life.
Right. But I was like doing this motion in the VR, and nothing was happening. And come to find out later, in that particular case, you don't actually pull the pin; you just kind of throw the grenade.
How did you remind me? How did you find that out?
I had to ask the.
You dropped it.
Oh, right.
And then it exploded.
In game, I was like, "This is not working," so I just dropped it, and then it exploded.
Yeah.
Thankfully, like I said, no player damage. But so the Bullet Train demo was my first experience in VR with shooters, and it was pretty fun. It was pretty fun. There was a cool little time warp, or little portal warp kind of thing too, where I got to shoot forward, and whenever I let go of a trigger, I would warp to that area.
Right.
That was kind of fun too. And then the other part was a surgery simulator, and I was operating on some alien. And this one, while I had a good time with the shooter one, this one wasn't so great.
You don't say. Surgery simulator. Sounds real fun in real life too. Not to put down surgeons, their job's very hard, and I won't do it.
Yeah, in this particular case, like just trying to grab things with my controls, it wasn't. When I was grabbing things in the virtual world, it didn't feel like I was grabbing them in the real world.
Right.
And that was a noticeable difference. So I would say the Bullet Train was a much better experience than the Surgeon Simulator. What about with the
Everest.
Vive? Yeah, Everest.
So Everest, first of all, the controllers with the Vive are weird. They're not in a bad way, but in a way that we didn't understand what something on the controllers did, and the NVIDIA people didn't either, because it sort of had just been dropped off by HTC or Valve or whoever, and they said, use this for your demo. So on the controllers, and we have B-roll of this, it's basically the standard wand controller. You have two of them, and at the top end of it, there's sort of a donut. And it almost looks like a receptacle for some kind of wireless transmission from the lighthouses. For those who don't know, there are lighthouses in the corners of the room. And in our demo this time, they were mounted on basically tripods. Mm-hmm. Those send, I guess, a laser...
Infrared, yeah.
Infrared to scan the room. It hits your receivers, IR receivers, in the headset, and those, by the way, are all covered up now. So if you've seen the previous model, they now are more embedded in the plastic, so it's not as obvious that there's...
Same thing now with the Oculus, yeah.
Right, yeah. So hits the receiver, tells it where you are, and then I think maybe the controller, it almost looks like that donut has something to do with the IR scanning.
Yep.
I'm not sure. I'm sure that some websites have gotten that information for today's launch. We did not. We didn't talk to HTC, but the wands are coming out with the headset. They work pretty well. Everything is very easy to interact with. The demo was impressive technologically. It wasn't really fun, but it wasn't meant to be kind of a fun thing. It was just like here's an experience. It's technologically impressive, and that in itself should be the fun part.
Yeah.
So as someone who has done several of these VR demos now, you start to get a bit jaded to the just how impressive and impactful they are.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that it's not to say that it's no longer interesting or impressive or good, but
I would agree.
After the first couple runs with the Vive or the Rift, you're just not in the same mindset where you're like, whoa, this is amazing.
Yeah.
This is mind-blowing. So I would say for that reason, I was not as impressed as previously when I really loved the Vive a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say I wouldn't buy it or something like that.
Right. As a matter of fact, one of the thoughts that I had was, man, I could see myself spending hours doing this.
Right.
But again, the same thing. I was no longer just, wow, this is amazing.
I think that novelty will sort of wear off in a real use case as well.
Yeah, good point.
Just like anything else. So there's kind of like a borderline risk there of, is it a novelty? And I think the answer is it depends on what kind of player you are. So for my use cases, I could see where just deploying the headset, the extra 5 to 10 minutes to kind of set everything up. You know, if you don't live in a place where you have a bunch of extra room and you need to move stuff around to set up the lighthouses so you can wander around a room because you don't just have an empty one.
Right.
That might be enough of a barrier for someone like me where I'm like, you know what, let me just sit down and play a game at my computer.
Yeah. Easier to do for sure.
Right. But obviously very different types of games in VR right now than on standard gaming setup.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see over time to see how the two different fields, join.
Yeah.
But
there's supposed to be more than 200 supported titles right now for the Rift, officially natively supported, not just like hacked together.
Right.
And the Vive, last I checked, which was a couple months ago, was something like 170 titles at the time, and that's got the Steam VR support. So the Valve, badge is a big deal.
That is.
So good news for those more normal, traditional titles, I guess. We haven't really played a lot of those in the demos. It's all been custom tuned.
Yeah, things that were meant to, wow us.
Right. Between the Vive and the Rift, if you, let's assume the price doesn't matter, you're given the choice, you may have one for free. Which one do you take?
It's a tough call because one of the things that I hadn't thought about earlier was the controls for the Rift. I actually like the handheld controls for the Rift more than I do for the Vive. One of the things in the experience with the Rift is that when you're using the handheld controls, it feels more like the hands that you just see.
Does it have like a kind of a cross guard?
Yeah, it very much like the hilt of a sword would have a cross guard, and so it kind of wraps around your hands. And when you move for the top trigger, you see that finger move, and when you move for the bottom trigger, you see your bottom 3 fingers move.
Right.
Which is a slightly different experience than what you get with the HTC Vive. But man, I tell you, all in all, I think I really like the mobility the Vive has. And for me, VR means having a more mobile experience. I like to move around a lot, do sports, those kinds of things. And I want that full range movement experience. And the Oculus is not built to do that. The experience that I had today with the bullet train, there was certainly movement in there. The experience I had with the surgeon simulation demonstration, that there was movement in there as well, like left to right and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't like I was just walking around a room with some freedom.
Right.
And so I would want that HTC Vive movement freedom.
I think it is hard to pick if you just get one for free. Which one is it? I've used the Vive a bit. I like it. I've used it more extensively than the Rift. The Rift I like for things like if I'm going to sit down and play Star Citizen. Yeah. Because in that instance, you don't need the IR tracking. Why burn ROI on it or money on it at BOM? And so you just sit at a computer, you put on the headset and play Star Citizen. You're already in a cockpit. Where you're sitting. Right. So the translation is very literal. Same for racing games, which I also like.
That's a good point.
Shooting games, I have not played in either headset. I play a lot of those. So I don't really know. The problem with shooting games, I guess, is if you play them more competitively, then by putting one of these things on, you're instantly going to suck.
Yep.
Compared to everyone else.
Yep.
So that'd probably be too much of a mental ego check for me to get over.
Right.
But I guess if everyone's using it, then it's a different story. I'd probably try the Rift over the Vive as a permanent solution, just because the mobility is cool, but the hassle of enabling the mobility for me would be too much of a pain.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, you're going to have a cleared room.
Right.
I mean, that's the truth of the matter with the Vive. You could make it so your living room was a big cleared space or whatever, but the best situation is a place that has a game room.
And technically, we were talking about this, I think you can probably just still use the Vive sitting at a computer.
Yeah, the hardware is very similar.
But then it's like you got all this extra stuff that you spent money for.
Yeah.
So it'll be a really interesting battle because they do actually cross over in some spaces. Like you can use them both sitting at a computer. You can use them to some degree, both doing some form of freedom of movement, different levels. So it'll be a serious battle. The pre-releases, the release windows are about the same time. AMD and NVIDIA are both really heavy on the support.
Which is nice.
Yeah, AMD's got their Gemini card that's coming out Q2 to coincide with the launches. NVIDIA, who knows what they're doing right now. Doing something, but we don't know what on the GPU side. We know on the GameWorks side they're doing a lot of enabling on the engines.
Yeah.
So that's a wrap of the experiences with these things, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, for more information, pricing, stuff like that, you'll just have to check back on the site because we don't have prices today.
We'll get it, though.
Yeah. So thank you for watching. If you like the coverage, as always, Patreon link, the post-roll video, and we will see you all next time.